BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And today is another Zodiac Killer upload. As you see, we're talking about the great Zodiac Killer hoax of 1986 by Thomas Henry Horan. And if by chance you've clicked on this link first, you'll see that this is part of a series. And if you haven't heard the previous segments yet, you can keep listening, because we're just having a discussion about the Zodiac Killer and a very large alternative theory out there. Now, to begin, first and foremost, I would say, I can never accept any money for this channel. I mean, there's no Patreon or anything like that. I don't know how I could ever ask anyone to donate anything. I mean, as you see, this is just a black box. Sometimes you see bubbles, sometimes you see effects, sometimes you see little glowy things around on the side. One time we had sparks. I like the sparks, to be honest. But one of the ways, though, that you can support this channel is, I would just invite you to check out our series on the Unabomber Manifesto, and I'll post a link to that in the description box here. And if you know anybody who's into true crime, or just people who like challenging different points of view, feel free to share that. All the links are pinned in like this series, so people can follow one episode to the next. Once again, that's on the Unabomber Manifesto. Just feel free to share the content like that. Invite somebody into the channel. That can be one way to support something like this, as opposed to giving money. Now, on to the Zodiac Killer hoax of 1986 by Thomas Henry Horan. First and foremost, I have to say, last time we mentioned a particular individual named William Joseph Grant. Grant goes by a couple different pseudonyms, but let's just stay on point with William Joseph Grant right now. I decided I wanted to learn a little bit more about him, because what Thomas Henry Horan was saying was, in the previous segment, is that William Joseph Grant was an open homosexual. He was bullied by a lot of people publicly, even by one individual named Les Lundblad, who was an investigator on the Zodiac case. And they believe that that's why Robert Graysmith originally wanted to vilify William Joseph Grant in his book, This is the Zodiac Speaking. And last time I said it was called This is the Zodiac. The original title of Graysmith's first book was This is the Zodiac Speaking, and it identifies a perpetrator named Andrew Todd Walker, and according to Horan, that guy is actually William Joseph Grant, who was an open homosexual. But I began to look into that a little bit more, and I found that there are some things out there saying that William Joseph Grant is actually the real identity of Lyndon Lafferty's suspect from The Silence Badge, also known as the Zodiac Killer cover-up from Lyndon Lafferty's book. He identifies somebody using the pseudonym George Russell Tucker, and even if you search for that stuff on the internet, you can see some people are saying that William Joseph Grant is Lafferty's suspect, which would mostly be impossible, because that whole theory is about how this guy found out his wife was having an affair with a judge, and he went berserk. His life was, all messed up. He felt like his ego was shattered. And the reason why he created the Zodiac Killer and started committing these murders and taunting the police was to restore his ego after his wife was having the affair. So it's like, well, which one is it? Is this guy openly gay, or does he have a wife that is betraying him? Is Andrew Todd Walker some bisexual guy? I mean, like, what's going on? In short, it's like there are just some conflicting stories about that, and that'll be one of the things that I'll look into in the future. But I do have to say, I was reading a book review of Lyndon Lafferty's The Zodiac Killer cover-up, and I really have to stress, a book review and blog post discussing it, not as opposed to the actual book itself. And what they were saying on that one was that Andrew Todd Walker and William Joseph Grant, like, what's the explanation? Somebody was going to a library and checking out books on cryptography, falsely using William Joseph Grant's name, and there's something there, like, that book review that I was reading didn't say anything about how William Joseph Grant is Lafferty's suspect. It said somebody was using Grant's name falsely, like at a time that Grant couldn't have been at the library checking out the books on cryptography. So I think that'll be just something that I'm going to investigate more. And I've had a good time talking to you guys about the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986. If there was ever another Zodiac book that I would like to get my hands on and read and discuss, it would be Lyndon Lafferty's The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up, also known as The Silence Badge. But I just wanted to point out that the internet has a lot of different things that people are saying about Andrew Todd Walker and William Joseph Grant. Okay, so if that wasn't a confusing and messy thing to say at all, in this part of the book that we're going through now, chapters 13 and 14, and a little bit of chapter 15 today, what I can say is Thomas Henry Horan really wants to vilify Robert Graysmith for changing his name in 1976. And the reason that he provides is that he does this very specifically to hide Graysmith's direct involvement with the Zodiac case, as well as that of his true employment at the San Francisco Chronicle. What Horan is saying is Graysmith changed his name legally from Robert G. Smith II to Robert Graysmith in 1976 because he was not just a cartoonist. He had a variety of jobs at newspapers. Principally, he was a production assistant. He was actually the person who took photographs of the Zodiac letters that were mailed in. And Graysmith did some other things, according to Horan as well. Like if they needed a map drawn for a newspaper article, he would make illustrations like of maps and of various things that needed to be illustrated for the newspaper. He had a variety of occupations. But, if you Google Robert Graysmith, you'll mostly see that he is referred to as a cartoonist. Horan believes that he changed his name to hide his involvement with being the production assistant, showing that he handled Zodiac hard evidence firsthand. He wants to just keep as much distance between himself and that, because according to Thomas Henry Horan, Robert Graysmith is manipulating all of the hard evidence to make it seem like there is this boogeyman in the dark, when in reality all of these murders are unconnected. And we talked about in the past about how Thomas Henry Horan even proposes that if you solve the final line of the first cipher, the block of letters that is all mashed together, it actually reveals not Robert Smith II, but Ropit Emmett II. And he's like, that's probably done as kind of an insurance policy in case anyone were actually to decipher it. Robert Graysmith could be like, what are you talking about? That's not my name. And I think that that's possible, but it's also a bit of a stretch. I don't know why Thomas Henry Horan has such a hard problem thinking about why some guy named Robert Graysmith would want to use that name instead of Robert Smith. Why is it so hard to accept that somebody named Robert Smith wanted to change his name to stand out from the crowd? His last name was Smith. I almost think maybe Thomas Henry Horan is dwelling too much on that, because Horan says very clearly Graysmith started working on the Zodiac Killer book in 1972, 4 years prior to changing his name. I mean, even if he put Robert G. Smith Jr., Robert G. Smith II on the book, if his last name is Smith, I mean, he's just going to get blended in with all the other writers. I think that that's a very simple thing to address, as opposed to him trying to distance himself from all of these first-hand Zodiac things, like handling the piece of Paul Stein's shirt. And I mean, that's an accusation that Horan throws against him, but definitely being the person that took the photographs of the Zodiac letters. And Horan does bring up a point in Robert Graysmith's 1986 book Zodiac, that when he says Graysmith talks about somebody else being the production assistant at the San Francisco Chronicle, and someone he doesn't identify by name, and Thomas Horan was just like, the reason he doesn't identify this person by name is because Graysmith was the actual production assistant. He is lying about a lot of things. He's even lying about what he has actually done. And I'm like, well, maybe. I mean, I can't provide too much of an alternative for that because I don't necessarily know if there was another production assistant, but I don't know. It seems like such a simple answer to that. I mean, he wants to be Robert Graysmith because he wants to promote the book, and he thinks that's a better pen name because he thinks that's a name that you're going to remember. I'm going to tell you, I definitely remember Graysmith much easier than Robert Smith Jr. I mean, I don't know why he's dwelling on that subject so much. But aside from that, on this channel, during our Zodiac uploads, we've talked about the 1978 letter from time to time. And I've mentioned, though, that I think it's rather strange that the Zodiac killings would start in 1968, possibly earlier, but 1968, and then the Zodiac murders cease in 1969, the confirmed ones. Possibly they continued, but the confirmed Zodiac killings end in 1969, and then the letters go all the way up to 1978. And what Horan talks about in this part of the book is that the reason why he believes the 1978 letter happened is they wanted to bring the Zodiac Killer back because Graysmith was planning to put out his book, This is the Zodiac Speaking, around 1980 or 1981, so they needed to kind of revitalize the situation, rejuvenate the public's curiosity with the Zodiac, and that was the motivation for the 1978 letter. And one of the things Thomas Horan wants us to be aware of is Robert Graysmith rarely autographs his copies of the book, and the reason that Horan is suspicious of is because he says that Graysmith doesn't want people seeing any sort of comparisons between his handwriting and something from the ciphers or the letters. But anyway, I think it's an interesting explanation about why the letters would have continued up to 1978, because they're hoping that Graysmith is going to put out this book, and this whole thing is a ploy, though, to get the book Zodiac out in 1986, because the book This is the Zodiac Speaking, which vilifies Andrew Todd Walker, was set to come out in 1981, and Horan gives us a few more details about how they wanted to really attract publishers, because Graysmith had never published the book before, and he wasn't very well known in terms of being a true crime writer. He was building a name for himself with networking between the other detectives, and one explanation provided by Thomas Henry Horan is, why would so many of these detectives go along with this thing? Why would other people be going along with the Zodiac Killer myth if it was indeed a myth? And the thing that he says is, they wanted to be mentioned in Graysmith's book. They knew that Graysmith was writing a book. Graysmith even talks about meeting with detectives, in Zodiac, and Horan has lots of block text about, like, meetings and having coffee with the detectives, and they're passing around the reports and letting Robert Graysmith read the reports. I mean, that's hearsay, more or less. It's just what Graysmith is recalled, saying that these events happened, what other people have told him and such. But it's like, Horan provides the explanation is, these people wanted to be mentioned in the book. And we mentioned Paul Avery in the last upload. He's like, people like Paul Avery were just very much set on publicity, and many of the other detectives also wanted publicity. They wanted to make names for themselves. They wanted an enormous amount of publicity pulled upon them, and that's why Horan believes that they would have continued onward with the Zodiac myth. Not to mention, though, there could be some things we could get to in the future about how this could be covering up certain activities that were done by the San Francisco Police Department Narcotics Division, and they didn't want to leak out certain information about their confidential informants, and having this Zodiac Killer myth was one of the ways that they could keep that under wraps. People are going to be thinking about the Zodiac and not about the San Francisco Police Department and the Narcotics Division. And also one of the reasons why the journalists would have gone along with Robert Graysmith's plan and Hal Snook's plan and just this entire Zodiac Killer myth is, they just want publicity for themselves. We finally have somewhat of a motivation, and perhaps there could have been some deal with Keith Power about how he's going to be mentioned in the Zodiac Killer book, and then Power and Graysmith have a falling out. And somebody left an interesting comment about that, though, on one of these previous Zodiac Killer hoax uploads, when they're just like, why would a journalist risk their entire career on a lie that could ruin them when they don't really know what the benefit's going to be? Why would a detective risk their entire career on a lie when they don't really know what the outcome is going to be? And I'm like, yes, I'd say that's an enormous point. And Horan does say very clearly that there is this kind of network of individuals that are in on the Zodiac Killer hoax, that are in on the Zodiac Killer myth, and they're all working together. But what I don't really see right now is a strong enough motivation for that to happen. They want publicity. I have to tell you, I don't know. I have some reservations about that. Once again, not saying that Thomas Henry Horan is wrong. I just have some reservations about that. I mean, like, I'm not convinced of that by any means. But anyway, I mean, what I think is more valuable is that we have this thing about uh, somewhat of a possible explanation about why the Zodiac Killer letters went up to 1978. When I first learned that the Zodiac letters went from 69 all the way to 78, but the last confirmed killing was October 11th of 69, I was like, well, a lot of those are probably not genuine Zodiac activity. I mean, I don't believe that those would have been written by any type of murderer. What it sounds more like to me is someone was fabricating that. I mean, if it's going to carry on as late as 78, I mean, we're talking 9 years after the Paul Stein murder. I mean, to me, that just sounds like someone who is, well, either trolling the police, people who are copycatting the letters, or perhaps it is something like what Thomas Henry Horn suggests, that they were trying to build up some publicity for Robert Graysmith's book. And I have to be very clear, I don't endorse Thomas Henry Horn's theory 100%. I mean, I just told you I had a lot of doubts about it. And that's one of the ways we can view it. There are lots of doubts because I wish I had a better expression other than what we said in the past. It feels like it's just falling short a little bit. But at the same time, they needed to bring back the Zodiac to the mainstream. They needed to get people thinking about the Zodiac Killer again, so that 2 years later they were expecting to put out this book. This is the Zodiac speaking. Robert Graysmith was, gonna mention all these detectives. And, we're still talking about people like Paul Avery, and we also mentioned someone like Les Lundblad. I don't think he's been mentioned too much. So they knew that they would get a certain sense of attraction. People would definitely be learning about them. And I can comprehend that to somewhat of an extent, but at the same time, I just don't necessarily know if we have enough connecting factors or we have enough supporting points to completely say that this is what happened and these were the reasons why it happened. Okay, so to recap today, Andrew Todd Walker has become much more elusive than I thought he would be. William Joseph Grant has a couple different backstories if we look into him, depending on which person on the internet you would like to believe. And what we can say is it's possible that a lot of these people, detectives and journalists, are all in on this thing because they want to become more famous and they have a reason to, because they want to promote the Zodiac Killer myth, and they also want to protect certain activities that the San Francisco Narcotics Department could be involved with. All right, and the 1978 letter was meant to be kind of a precursor to Robert Graysmith's 1980 or 81 book, This is the Zodiac Speaking. Now, one thing that I have to be very clear about is, Horn doesn't say why This is the Zodiac Speaking wasn't published, and it came out in 1986 as the book Zodiac. He says he's not sure. But to me, if that indeed did happen the way he said it did, my first instinct was that they probably learned something new about Andrew Todd Walker, or they probably learned something new about William Joseph Grant, and then they were like, oh, wow, maybe he has alibis for all of the incidents in Zodiac activity, or something in the narrative just didn't work out, and then they're just like, holy crap, we can't do this, or somebody pulled the plug on it. Like, once again, there is this network of individuals that are all connected, and I mean, those are just the first feelings that I have about that, and those are feelings. I don't know 100%. But if you have any comments to say about the material that we've discussed in this upload here, if you have anything to say at all about the Great Zodiac Killer hoax and some of the things that we mentioned, like why the letters continued as long as they did, and about the backstory of William Joseph Grant, I'm going to investigate more, and we're going to talk more about that in the future. But that's all I really have to say for now. That's all from me. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. If you want to subscribe and you haven't subscribed already, you're welcome to hit that subscribe button. And most importantly, please drop some comments below, and feel free to share our thing from the Unabomber Manifesto in the description box here. And until next time.